Hello class, this is Matt Romero, and as part of completion of Finance 695 of our MBA program, I am going to put together this video for you. It's just a short video, a video that is going to attempt to show a relationship between turnover ratios and 5-year returns. To do such, we are going to analyze the data set of a mixture of passively managed S&P 500 index funds and actively managed large capitalization mutual funds. To give a little background and the reasoning behind why I chose those type of funds, so we're going to see here that the S&P 500 index is an American stock market index that is comprised of the largest 500 U.S. companies. The companies are weighted according to their market capitalization within the index. The S&P 500 index funds are built to mimic the market capitalization of all companies within the S&P 500, and that index funds generally provide highly correlated returns with the index they mimic. Also to note is that S&P 500 index funds are also correlated with low turnover ratios due to their passive management. The large cap active funds, on the other hand, due to their involvement with a active human being manager, they tend to have a higher turnover ratio. And in my thinking and research and what I would think would be common perception, I would think that most people would assume that being that a fund is actively managed, that an individual is dedicating time to stay abreast on the market and make moves within the fund on a continual basis, that a actively managed fund may or should produce higher returns than a passively managed fund. With that being said, I am trying to prove that the opposite is true. The hypothesis being that a passively managed fund is over the long run, over a 5-year period, does show a higher return. So speaking of turnover ratio, let's give a background on that as well. Mutual fund turnover measures the replacement of holdings in a mutual fund. If a fund has 100% turnover, the fund replaces all of its holdings over a 12-month period. That is just kind of an example. None of the funds that we'll look at will have 100% turnover ratio. I'm not even 100% sure. I'm not even completely sure that there are any funds out there that have 100% turnover ratio. In general, S&P 500 index funds have a lower turnover ratio compared to actively managed funds. This is not to say that all funds that mimic the same index have equally low turnover ratios, but in general, they definitely do. So once again, the hypothesis is that the turnover ratio is correlated with the 5-year return of the S&P 500 index fund. I believe that the lower turnover ratios reduces fund fees due to automated fund management and will result in higher returns. The method chosen was regression. Regression is a statistical process for estimating the relationship between variables. In this case, we're estimating the relationship between turnover ratio and 5-year earnings. Turnover ratio is our independent variable, and 5-year earnings is our dependent variable. Also note that if we do find a correlation, that correlation does not imply causation. This is important because we're only testing 2 variables, and although we may find correlation or may not, we just want to we don't want to imply that a correlation is determinant on just those variables. Obviously, there's multiple variables that are not going to be analyzed here that could also be a factor in either a high or low turnover ratio correlation. So to run our statistical test, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze the t-stats. And what t-stats are is the difference between, the difference measured in units of standard error. So the farther above or below 0, the greater the difference, while the closer to 0 demonstrates less significant difference. We will use the benchmark of 1.65. We'll also use p-value. And what p-value is the p-value is the probability of obtaining a given t-value from a subset of data. From my research, I found that a p-value of 0.05 is considered borderline significant. So let's go to Excel here and let's look at our data. So how I have this broken down here, column B is our symbols, and our symbols are for 27 mutual funds, and as discussed, these are a combination of passively managed funds, index funds, and actively managed large cap funds. I did choose large cap funds that were actively managed because I felt that they demonstrated the, I guess I should say that they were most related to the S&P 500 index, in that we're looking at large companies, and that they should have some correlation in the companies being analyzed. So in column C here is our T ratio or turnover ratio, and you can see at the top half of the data set here is generally low, and then as we get into our actively managed funds, we do see higher turnover ratios. And I think I may have actually fibbed to you, because I'm looking at this one here and I see that this actually did have a turnover ratio of 100%. So here we go at the 1.12. And then column D is our 5-year returns, and I got this information from Yahoo Finance under the historical data tab. And what we're going to do is we're going to use column D, or our 5-year returns, as our dependent variable, and we are going to use column C, or our turnover ratio, as our independent variable. And to do such, we will run the regression as discussed earlier. So coming here to data, and then data analysis, and regression. Okay, and as we discussed, our T ratio is going to be our independent value. So we are going to select everything in this column. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay. And then for our Y value, or our dependent, we're going to come back over here to column D, and we're going to select our 5-year returns. Okay, and, oh, sorry. Shoot. Okay, and then one thing that we're going to do, as Dr. Cresson mentioned, is we're also going to click labels here, because we did include that very first row. And with that being set up, new worksheet, we should be able to run our regression. Yeah, let me go ahead and expand some of these columns for us. So really the most important ones are the ones we talked about, right? So that would be our p-value here, our t-stat, our coefficient. So you see here we have our turnover ratio, and by looking at our coefficients here, I see a negative coefficient. So that is telling me that As one variable goes up, the other one goes down, and vice versa. And over here at our T-stats, we do see significance here. 1.65 was our benchmark, and we see a 3.3, so quite high compared to our benchmark. And going back to coefficient once again, I should mention that although we see a negative relationship here, we don't necessarily see a huge relationship. So basically, our slope is not very steep here, but there definitely is a negative correlation. And then our p-value here being quite low relates to our higher t-stat value here. So I would say that by looking at just this sample of our data, that our correlation makes sense. So our hypothesis makes sense, I should say. So our hypothesis was that as t ratio increases, returns should decrease, and we did get a negative correlation on that. So that makes sense there. And with our t-stat, we got a t-stat that's significant. It was above the benchmark. So we do understand that the degrees of difference there are significant. And then our p-value, which shows the probability of the t-stat, was quite low. I think 0.05 was the number that we used. With our small data set and having a low p-value, we were able to see that we do have